sound before, and I was outside the fence, but it was a sound of the bat that I had never heard before in my life. That was Ruth hitting the ball. And the next time I heard that sound, I'm in Washington, D.C. I rushed out, and there was Josh Gibson hitting the ball. And I heard this sound again. Now, I didn't hear it anymore. I'm in Kansas City, and I heard this sound one more time that I hadn't heard only twice in my life. Now, you know who this is? Bo Jackson swinging at that, and now I heard this sound. It was a thrill for me. I said, here it is again. I heard it again. I've only heard it 3 times in my life, but now I'm living because I'm going to hear it again one day if I live long enough.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Not Content Podcast. My name is Jerome Son. As always, we are here from the Q on our podcasting network. Please leave a 4 or 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. Please like and subscribe to us on YouTube. Here tonight, we are going to be discussing the final 3 innings of baseball, as Ken Burns, way back in 1994, presented 9 innings. Can you imagine, Brian, in like the span of 10 days or 11 days or whatever, getting 9 innings, 2-hour documentaries every single night on PBS? Can you imagine that?
I can imagine it because PBS was kind of not a powerhouse, but they had definitely more leverage in the 90s. That's for sure, I would say. And doing that at the same time that they were thinking this was going to be the last month of the season before the postseason in '94. It's just, we talked about the timing before. It's so unfortunate, but I can imagine it's interesting because basically the thing that I saw was a recording of the Cleveland telecast. So someone obviously did watch each night in a row and recorded each night. So I'm kind of the witness to it because I saw the dude's recording. So I can only imagine just what they thought they were going into. They were probably thinking this was going to be an hour thing, and then once part 1 happened and it was 2.5 hours, the guy was probably thinking oh shit, we're in for a whole fucking thing here. And then 10 days later, man, God knows how many hours and how much footage we've gone through, but it's basically the history of baseball up to 94 in a nutshell, so to speak. But they did skip over some stuff. We'll get into that, but what they did cover, they covered well, let's just say.
So we start with the capital of baseball. For those of you, and I know that one of the big critiques is how heavily focused on New York and Boston it is. The 7th inning is certainly not going to help that, as this inning is essentially all about the 3 New York teams of the time: the New York Yankees, the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the New York Giants. The Yankees start out the decade incredibly dominant with multiple World Series. The greatness of Casey Stengel, maybe regarded as one of the greatest baseball managers of all time. One of the nice things that you get as you get into the 50s is some of the writers who are talking heads were live for some of this, so you are getting kind of firsthand accounts. And I think that's what makes this episode so much more memorable than some of the previous ones. Is it's great to have the perspective and some of the background, but to actually hear kind of firsthand accounts of when they were either young journalists or young kids in many cases. It was really great to get kind of their perspective, especially with everything that's going on with the New York Yankees, with the New York Giants. The New York Giants, of course, are heavily referenced because of their victory against the Brooklyn Dodgers, courtesy of one Bobby Thompson in 1951. We also get Willie Mays' catch. And really, this is the only time they talk about Willie Mays, and it's a crime that Willie Mays does not get talked about more. You also get kind of the ending of the Negro Leagues, as well as some more stuff with Jackie Robinson. Of course, for Brian, it was in so many ways the emotional climax of this documentary is the Brooklyn Dodgers finally winning a world championship in 1955, and then the heartbreak of them leaving Brooklyn to go to Los Angeles. And then, of course, we get the beginning of West Coast baseball as the New York Giants move to San Francisco and become the San Francisco Giants, to which they are still the team of that to this day. And, of course, the Brooklyn Dodgers become the Los Angeles Dodgers, and baseball enters the Pacific time zone. Brian, I could just summarize the 7th inning. Let's break it down. Where do you want to start?
I want to talk about the Negro Leagues really quick because it's kind of like what happened, like I mentioned last week. It's like the territory system for like, Crockett, Continental, Florida, all those old territory systems kind of died out because of the talent going to WWE or Crockett or whatever, and the attendance was going down. Similar kind of situation with the Negro Leagues because all the top players started to go to the MLB. Therefore, their league kind of decreases in terms of quality a little bit until the point where, the Negro Leagues are no longer in existence. So I just wanted to point that out and to kind of point out the kind of similarities to territory systems and stuff like that, and even talk about some of the financial numbers about how like it was almost immediate once once the top players started leaving that their finances were going down in terms of like the Negro Leagues and the attendance and stuff like that. So I thought that was really kind of fascinating. That kind of parallels a lot of different sports whenever something like that happens. And of course, I'm a diehard Dodger fan. As of this recording, we're going into Game 5 of the NLDS tomorrow, so who knows what's going to happen. But just seeing Vince Scully getting emotional and all the old Dodger footage, and seeing the old Brooklyn Dodger fans and finally winning it, I got really emotional seeing that stuff. Because if you look at their history, the '50s too, they just kept losing, and I just know that feeling of just losing in the World Series in the modern era. So I definitely relate to the old Dodger fans. I guess it's the history of just losing at the wrong time and winning every once in a while just to give you that carrot at the end of the stick, and then going back to losing for a little bit. So that's kind of these ups and downs of being a Dodger fan. It's not like the Yankees where they just have consistency for so many years. And the first 4 or 5 years of the 1950s were just dominated by the Yankees. So just that feeling of like having this eternal rival. And I've heard the whole Yankees-Dodgers thing as like the greatest rivalry in sports, but it's yet to happen in my lifetime. So I don't know. It's crazy that it's happened so many times before I was born. I was born in '88, and I think the last time was '81 that it was Dodgers-Yankees. So it's just crazy to me that
that's it.
Yeah, and they've been in rivals before that so many times in the World Series. But then again, that's also a testament to the changing of the playoff system. It's not that easy to get to the World Series now. You have to go through all these different playoff rounds. So that kind of is attributed to that as well. But as of right now, like the last, I don't know, 5-10 seasons, we've had like this tease of like possibly the Dodgers or the Yankees in the World Series again, and it just hasn't happened. I don't know if I'm just like saying this now and then prophetically it's going to happen in 3 weeks from now we're going to get that World Series, but you never know. But it's just crazy to me that, and yet I've yet to see it in my lifetime, and I've just kind of been waiting for that and dreading it at the same time, because as much as I love Babe Ruth, I am just not the biggest Yankees fan at all, especially from that 90s 2000s era. It just made me a total Red Sox over Yankees fan. So yeah, I'm just really excited at that potential in my lifetime, but I don't know if it's ever going to happen again.
It is insane to me just how often they played each other and how basically the Yankees won all those times, the Dodgers won once. It is very reminiscent of the Boston Celtics and the Lakers as well. They played so many times in the NBA Finals, and the difference is the Lakers and Celtics also kind of have a relatively recent finals matchups. They played in 2008 and 2010. Boston has won most of their matchups for the Lakers. I think have won just enough. So it's really fascinating to think that you have these great rivalries that transcend these time zones. And again, these Yankee teams are some of the best teams in the history of baseball. And I don't know that you're ever going to get 5 consecutive World Series. And this is what the Yankees did on a couple of occasions in the first half of the 20th century. And this is how they became one of the marquee franchises in all of professional sports. And of course, you also have Jackie Robinson gets talked about a great deal. You get Yogi Berra talked about. Brian, any feelings on the Abbott and Costello routine? Who's on first? Remember when comedy was actually funny and not like sad?
Well, it's less punch and attack kind of comedy. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's just break this person down for for their characteristics and make fun of them kind of thing. And instead, this was just the classic bit of like misinterpretation and not knowing what's going on, and one thing the audience knows and the character on stage doesn't know kind of thing. And that's kind of how comedy worked back in the day. But it's a classic thing, like who's on first, who's on second, and then it's this whole thing about the guy's name is actually who's on first, and then poor the dude's confused, and I'm getting confused. But it's just it's funny because especially when you hear the laugh track.
Listen, Brian, we all know that who is Jim Neidhart. All right.
Okay, that's a deep cut, and that's such a deep cut that on I think his last figure they released, they added a switchable head to make him who. And if you don't know who that is, look up Jim Neihart, singles run, WWF, all the different gimmicks. They tried, but they
I
did
mean,
release a switch it out.
it's so fucking weird that Jim Neidhart was literally a wrestler named WHO. That is unbelievable.
I know, and it was just an ugly mask too. And I've always said like put masks on wrestlers more to make it more marketable. And in that case, it was clearly just Jim the Anvil. So
Anyway, do you have any feelings on the big Bobby Thompson home run? Of course, since even this documentary has come out, more information about the Giants possibly cheating. I mean, look, it's not great, and I'm sure Ralph Branca feels pretty crappy about it, but I mean, it's one of those things like it's part of the advantage, and again, cheating has been a part of baseball for such a long time that it doesn't really phase me. I mean, again, I don't think it's okay, but like there's nothing you can do about it.
I mean, historically, I mean, obviously, I wasn't alive at the time of the home run, obviously, but looking back on it, I have no grudges about it, considering that the Dodgers lost. I mean, we're how many games ahead and then lost? So, whenever you have a team that's so ahead and then drops that kind of lead, you can't really blame the team but themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not the Giants' fault. They played their ass off to get there, right? And I guess based on whatever loose rules there are, you can't really say who did and did not cheat, because there's probably people that did cheat that were never caught and were never known for it. So it's just like, it's kind of up in the air in terms of that. I'm fine with it emotionally, but it just goes to show you don't take a lead for granted ever, ever, ever in any sport or any league you're on. If you have a 10-game lead, don't coast. And I know some of these young players have seen it where they just kind of coast sometimes, and then it costs them, and then they're in shock that on the last weekend of the season they lose their top spot to another team that came out of nowhere, right? It happens all the time. Like, but it just seems like, don't lose sight of what's going on. Just maintain the fucking lead. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I've seen it so many times where teams have this epic collapse, and that's one of them. So,
I mean, it
you know,
happens in basketball and football all the time now. It
yeah, and
feels
then
like it. We just every week.
it's crazy, and it happens. So just never take it for granted. Like, that's one of my mottos: is don't take things for granted, especially in sports when you have that kind of lead. And then when it comes to the Dodgers, I've heard the criticism like, yeah, they'll build up this lead and then kind of like take some time off in the middle and kind of coast. And I've kind of seen them go through these ups and downs. And some of those seasons they did kind of coast, and I don't know if it really helped the team or not. But when you're like averaging 100 wins every season, I can kind of see some people doing that. But don't take it for granted.
So we also, of course, have Kurt Flood. He becomes such a key character, and he is a real tragic story in the history of baseball because free agents, every single free agent in any professional sport, probably owes like 1% of their salary to Kurt Flood just because of what he did and the sacrifices that he made. And to me, his again with what his life turned into, becoming an alcoholic and basically not being able to play the game that he loved. And I mean, not to mention all the racism he had to deal with. Of course, there's also that. But in many ways, I think Kurt Flood is probably underrated. I mean, yes, he was a great ball player, but just in terms of like he actually sacrificed something. We'll get into this more in the next inning, but anytime he talks, I think the way that he frames the different struggles that he went through, the prejudice in this inning, there's a lot of weight to it.
Yeah, it's like he went through all the levels of like legality he can possibly go through and just get denied each time.
Literally to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, the Supreme
Literally
Court ruled in favor of the Major League Baseball. The claim is about slavery. I guess you can kind of stretch that a little bit, but it's more to the indentured servitude of the
There
legality.
is literally a part in the next inning called the plantation, which is not exactly subtle, and it's really fascinating.
Yeah, especially when the white guys are talking about plantation and slave, yeah, stuff like that. But when it came to Kurt Flood, I was
But
just like, okay,
that Marvin Miller, who is white, is the one that is calling it a plantation, which I think, I mean, it shouldn't carry more weight, but it does.
it definitely did for sure. And he was the one wearing the CCCP hat as well.
Oh, Marvin Miller.
That dude's a character. He's a
I read
character.
a book. That was Bill Lee. That was Bill Lee that was wearing the CCCP
Oh,
hat.
okay. My bad. But it's
But
still.
I read a book that Marvin Miller wrote about his entire struggle to get the union going, and he is one of the most important people in the history of baseball.
Oh, you're
I
talking
could
about.
not.
You get
What?
it. He looks like Lance Hendrickson. That's how you're gonna refer him to now. Marvin Miller is Lance Hendrickson because he even sounds like him. Because he sounds so stern when he's talking about the past history of baseball and the past executives and all the conspiracies. We'll get to that in the ninth inning, but he just seems like he knows all the bullshit, right? And
Oh,
he's like
he
hard
knew
stern about it.
he knew where a lot of bodies were buried. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's why I like Lance Hendrickson. He looks like Lance Hendrickson. If Lance Hendrickson was to give a performance like this, it would sound exactly like Marvin Miller because that's how Lance Hendrickson sounds. It's pretty stern and straightforward. And yeah, that's how Marvin Miller was in these interviews. But it just opened up a whole lot of a lot of can of worms, but also shed a lot of light on things, which will, especially in the ninth inning, we'll get into. But yeah, he's a very important character, a very important person in this whole thing about the reserve clause and whatnot. And it just sucks that Kurt Flood never got to experience that the fruits of his labor, so to speak, right? Because it happened 20
No,
years later.
his life is kind of a tragedy when you read about it and everything that happened postward with alcoholism. And again, it happens to so many of these black athletes is they literally get broken down and they become shells of their former selves, and it really sucks. But let's talk about the Dodgers in the 50s, of course, winning their world championship and then leaving because of white flight. That's what it amounts to. They don't really say that, but when you get into this era, the 50s and the 60s, there are white people moving out of the urban areas and into the suburbs. And what you're ending up with is a lot of black people. And that is not ideal for baseball. At least that is their perception of it. And it really, really sucks that. And again, like at this point, the Dodgers have been in Los Angeles longer than they've been in Brooklyn, and they're kind of the original West Coast teams in some. They are the kind of the original West Coast team in so many ways. But when you hear about what happens, it just sucks, and it is really surprising to me with the renaissance of Brooklyn that we have not gotten another Brooklyn baseball team.
I don't know. I guess because I took an urban planning class in first year of college. We talked about white flight. We specifically talked about Boyle Heights in Los Angeles, which became this hodgepodge of different cultures around this time, actually. So I don't know if that had something to do with this influx of the Dodgers coming in and all these different cultures embracing the Dodgers too as well. I don't know if there's a connection to that, but this idea of white flight, credit to you, Jerome. I didn't expect that term to come up in this discussion, but we definitely had that discussion in urban planning and that college class that I had because that was a very real thing, and we were talking about how
They don't say it, but to me, that's what when they talk it, the way they kind of talk around it. I don't know if they're
But it
not
makes sense
comfortable.
when we talked about Boyle Heights, how these communities came together because they were just kind of rejected by these white, you know, suburbs, and they kind of made their own kind of community. So you should look up Boyle Heights. It's a pretty interesting part of LA that's kind of grown out of that kind of stigma and become its own kind of thing now. But I don't know. It just kind of fascinates me when you bring that up, and that just immediately flashed in my head. But yeah, it's sad, but I guess the city just was ready to embrace some kind of sports team, right? Um, the Lakers were going to come there a couple years later, or before this, I forget, but
I
um,
mean, here's my thing. Like I understand, like the Boston Braves, the St. Louis Browns, like those teams were like there are some cities that should not have two baseball teams. To me, at this stage where we are right now, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago absolutely should have two baseball teams. Like there is enough room for them, regardless of what's happening with the White Sox right now. Like there are three cities that should absolutely have it. But to me, to lose both Brooklyn and to lose the Dodgers and the Giants, it sucks. Like the Giants moving makes sense, but again, it feels like the Dodgers never should have left.
so were the New York Knickerbockers? They turned into the Giants, or they were a different team?
I mean, there was the Highlanders who became the Yankees.
Because like the Mets won the title in '69, which we're going to talk about, but what they were originally a different name, or they were always the Mets. I forget.
I mean, they were always the New York Metropolitans.
Okay, so I guess they just kind of came after Brooklyn or around that time to kind of replace them, I guess.
Yeah,
So
I mean, they started. They put a New York. I mean, it's weird to me that these two teams left New York and then they just put a National League franchise in New York and then had them play at the old Giant Stadium. It's like, what are we doing? Like, why don't you just? It's so dumb. And the thing is, like, this is the. I mean, it's not the same thing, but I mean, this is what happened. What's happening to Oakland right now? This is something that still reverberates all these years. So yeah, it's really unfortunate.
right, because the
They talk
Dodgers
about the
played in the Coliseum for the first 2 years, and then we get to Dodger Stadium, which is exactly what's happening with the Sacramento A's, so to speak. God, I hate saying that out loud, but I guess that's what it's going to say on the uniform. I don't even know. It's crazy. We'll talk about more of that in the ninth inning of our ninth inning when we talk about Moneyball, because that's so relevant now more than ever with the A's. But yeah, it's crazy to me that like, I mean, the move to me makes sense because LA was so big and expansive at the time, and this was the era where we're transitioning from like orange fields in LA to like buildings popping up here and there, and then more buildings popping up there, and then less agriculture. So it just made sense to me that they would go to LA because there's just so much room. And I know the controversies about Chavez Ravine and kicking people out and all these different stories, but here we are now, and there are still some of those houses at the edge of, like, right at the border of Chavez Ravine. So yeah, those are some lucky people, I guess, that if you grew up there, right in that area, you were just right next to Dodger Stadium. But just crazy to me that like this move happened so long ago, and that it's been longer that there have been, LA than Brooklyn and all these kind of things. But I think at the heart of it all, like, I think Vince Scully is like the important key factor here because he's the one that ties both franchises together, right? I mean, it's the same franchise, but both city histories together. So I like that Vince Scully has been kind of that guy, or was the guy to kind of hold that history together. So, now that he's passed away, it's all, mostly all LA talk now, but there's still that history of Brooklyn that's deep down and rooted into the LA fan base.
So the ending of the documentary, I think there are two things. One of which is aged pretty well. You get the moment of Ted Williams' spectacular final at bat where he hits a home run and doesn't do a curtain call, and it's this unbelievable moment because I mean, just because of who he is. And you know what didn't age well? Mario Cuomo talking about, and again, that Mario Cuomo is like an important talking voice, but given his offspring, not great. You know the story about Andrew Cuomo and Chris Cuomo, I think.
I've heard that they've been corrupt. That's all I know. But I looked up their dad, and I was like, isn't this like one of those Cuomo people now? And I had to look it up. It's like, oh, it's their dad. And like he was this beacon of like Democratic Party hope, and his kids just gotta fuck it up.
Definitely talk of him being the president, a presidential candidate at one point. And
I mean, he sounds like a dude that I would vote for, to be honest. Like, if I was like a 25, 30-year-old voter at the time, and like around that time, I would consider voting for him for president. I mean, not even the baseball stuff, because I mean, we got Steve Garvey here trying to run in LA, and I'm not for that at all. But he would be a good choice, I think. Mario Cuomo.
All right, let's talk about the eighth inning. Brian, I'm not going to summarize because I want you to talk about the ending of Ty Cobb because you very much spoke out against Ty Cobb, justifiably so. But my God, what an ending!
No one showed up to his funeral, or the fact that he pissed people off even when he died. It's like the dude just had a old grumpy man ending, right? Like that's pretty much it. I mean, what can you say?
I mean, there's a tragic element. Like again, I'm not endorsing in any way his behavior. He got what he deserved. But I think there is a tragedy to a man who is genuinely one of the best baseball players of all time, and nobody cared that he died. Basically, I think there is a tragedy in that. And again, there's a lesson to be learned about that too. Like if everybody hates you, like this is just kind of who you are.
Yeah, and that's kind of the vibe I'm getting that I got. Is just like, people didn't like the dude, and then no one's gonna like you, and they're not gonna show up to your funeral if they don't like you, kind of thing. So that's the life lesson, is just like, don't be a dick. I mean, that's been one of these things, these recurring themes of like life that I've noticed the last couple of years. Just don't be a dick. It's simple as that. And then, yeah. And then, I don't know. It's mixed feelings again. Like, his stats are incredible, but the guy's a piece of crap. So there's only so much you can say. But then again, it's like, how many baseball players have I idolized that that are pieces of crap that I don't know about because they hide it. So it's always that mixed feeling about, like, who.
I think Tom. I don't know. I think Thomas Boswell says it really well. I don't know if it's this inning, but he talks about the idea of treating baseballs as human beings. And again, I'm not saying that we should not be worshiping these players. I think understanding them as human beings with flaws is what is generally a good rule of thumb. And I think there's a lot of discussion about separating the art from the artist. I'm increasingly cynical about that point of view, but it's really interesting. So Brian, we've compared baseball players to wrestlers. Brian, I got one for you. Roger Maris is Kevin Nash. Mickey Mantle is Scott Hall. Go.
Are you talking about breaking the Babe Ruth Goldberg streak? Because I mean, okay.
Brian,
so how many games did Babe Ruth do it in? How many games did Babe Ruth have to play in one season to get his record?
I don't know, but to me, like, the thing is like, a record is a record. It's made to be broken. And to me, he broke the record. Like, yes, it took him more games, but he had to play.
See, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I just wanted to kind of show what the other side of this argument that I never even knew was like an argument until like now. Because like when I saw Mark McGwire break that record, they mentioned no mention of like, oh, Babe Ruth did it, but in way less games than Roger Maris did. It was all about Roger Maris did it in the season, and we're gonna have it in the season.
Thing is, McGwire broke it in like early September. That's why it didn't come up.
So then it's not even an argument almost. So yeah, so it's like it's kind of pointless.
I think putting an asterisk was stupid. I think it really just demeaned the records. But I mean, Mickey Mantle as Scott Hall, is there a more perfect comparison than
that? I like the comparison because it's just kind of, it's like, the two
incredibly talented people who were alcoholics and couldn't manage their demons,
but have star power and star quality. It's I definitely see that.
Kind of sound similar too.
Yeah, that's true. That's true too. I didn't see it before. Now you're making a lot of sense on this one. But oh man, just the thing with the Maris record to me is just like, I don't know. It's just, he had this emotional breakdown that he didn't want to like defeat his idol. Like, was that the whole point of the breakdown, or he just couldn't handle the pressure?
Oh, I think the media was just giving him shit, and because he's not Babe Ruth, like, he didn't have that personality. And I mean, I just think the mental wear and tear is really, I mean, playing in New York, it's just a completely different thing, man. Like, it's just, I don't care. Like, Chicago and Los Angeles are big cities, but to me, New York is a pressure cooker. It always has been. It always will be. And I think it's really tough to be successful there. I think it takes a certain personality and demeanor that a lot of guys, some of the greatest athletes of our time, just have never been able to find success there. And it's hard to explain sometimes. But you also get in this inning a lot of talk of expansion. We get a nice little map, and they show kind of different teams that come into existence, including the Twins and the Astros. You also get the emergence of Sandy Koufax, who basically spent the first 5 years not knowing how to pitch, and then pretty much becoming one of the greatest pitchers of all time. Brian, anytime I see Sandy Koufax's face, I can't help but think, why is he Anthony Perkins, and why is Anthony Perkins Sandy Koufax?
Well, Anthony Perkins is not nearly as tall, I don't think, but I've definitely seen that comparison, and I've seen it myself, and I kind of like lean into it. It's just a height part. But yeah, that's basically it. It's just like the facial features. But the fact that he retires at 36 is just like one of those
31.
31? I thought it was 36. Okay. Wow.
He's the youngest Hall of Famer of all time at 36.
Oh, okay. They inducted him in 36. Okay. That's where I kind of mixed it up. But still, it's just like, wow. You know what I mean? It's like one of those things, like, I don't know if they had, when did they have Tommy John surgery? Not around this time, obviously, right? Like, if he did, hypothetically, would have it extended his career? Was it an overall? I don't know. Because the way he played was too hard, maybe. And that was the thing. Like, he just seems like...
he didn't know how to... He was a thrower, not a pitcher. That was his problem. And then he finally learned how to pitch. And his elbow was in too bad a shape, and I
I
mean
mean, the
it's
fact, the
just
way they describe it is like he had to heat up so much his arm before every
yeah.
game that immediately ice it down. Just it screamed like, oh, that's a bad sign to me. Like immediately, like that just screams like you got some really delicate muscle issues going on, and you're not going to be able to hold up. So it's just amazing that he's one of the all-time great pitchers, but his great seasons were like 5 years total, maybe. Um, but Vince
Pretty
Scully
much. I
described him
mean,
as one of the greats.
I mean that was a pitcher. It was a pitcher's golden age, and if you have a chance, go listen to the ninth inning of the perfect game that he threw in 1965, as called by Vince Scully. It is a work of art,
Oh,
work of
I've
performance.
heard some clips, and Vince Scully is truly like probably the GOAT. I don't know if he is, but personally, as a baseball
I mean,
announcer, he just
baseball
checks
out.
out.
I mean,
He
baseball
checks all the
announcers.
boxes. You know what I'm saying? He tells stories. He doesn't rush his calls. He raises the levels when he has to at certain moments. He makes main event moments, kind of thing. So yeah, I think
There,
Vince Scully in this later half of the
there
series
will
just
never
was
be another
awesome.
Vince Scully.
I
Just
know,
no.
I know.
We got the 1962 Mets, no longer the worst team in the history of professional baseball, as managed by Casey Stengel. You got kind of a sad ending to his career. You get discussion of Pete Rose and his emergence on the scene. We'll get to that. We'll talk a lot more about him in the final inning, I think. You get Carl Yastrzemski's 1967 season, and he is counterbalanced by the great Bob Gibson, who I feel like doesn't get talked about enough as just one of the most savage competitors outside of Michael Jordan that I have ever heard about. We get a little bit of George Carlin. We get Earl Weaver. We get the Mets 7 years into their existence, becoming the Miracle Mets and becoming the 1969 World Champions. But it's weird to me that they don't mention the Cubs' epic collapse in '69, and it just really feels like that is a missing element of the story.
Yeah, anytime, like I mentioned before, any epic collapses like that, you got to kind of mention, and don't take this for granted. But yeah, I'm just looking at it now and looking at the Mets run since then. Like last time they won was '86, but the last couple runs they've had have been really exciting to the point where they made the World Series in 2015. I don't know if it's slightly a curse for them. They have a hot team right now. They just beat the Phillies as of this recording, and they've done it like on the road with this new playoff system. So I don't know. They seem really scary. I think I can easily see them beat the Dodgers at 7 in some kind of alternate universe. Maybe it's 6. Like I fear the Mets if we make it past this round. So I'm being totally honest because right now they're hot. But this team got hot in 1969, and that's the thing. It's like when you get hot, like you said, things can happen, and the tide turns in some of those games, and that's all they need to do. And then and boom, all of a sudden, you're a World Series champ. And you look at the Detroit Tigers this year, and they're kind of on a similar kind of path right now, even though they lost today's game. But we'll see on that one too. But yeah, there's a lot of hot teams that once you get hot at the right time, despite like having losing records in the past previous seasons, you could just make the playoffs and have a run.
Um, any thoughts on George Carlin contrasting baseball and football?
Oh, I've heard that bit before, and I've laughed every time I've heard it. I was surprised they put the whole
It's the
bit in
one.
here.
It's probably the one clean clip they could find.
That's not clean. That's clean. Not because George Carlin was cussing at every other joke, probably in his whole career. And then of course the 7 deadly words you
I
can't say on
bet
TV.
if you would told George Carlin you have to do an hour show without swearing, I bet he could do it.
I bet he can do it. Like he clearly had a good 5-minute skit here talking about baseball and football's comparison and how baseball's about like coming home safe and about football's about taking your men across the field and going to the invading territory and scoring. So it's just like, yeah, man, that's one of the great comparisons I've ever heard between baseball and football. But
It's pretty great.
yeah, it's crazy to think that George Carlin looks so old in '93. I just couldn't believe it because to me, like, I know he died in like 2005 or 6 or whatever. Just he's always looked
Right.
old, but I don't know, just because that was around that time you filmed Bill and Ted too. So yeah, I really appreciate George Carlin in those Bill and Ted roles as well.
Is Bill Lee like your favorite player of all time? Because I could see that.
So I mean, I really know nothing much about him other than like these interviews that I've seen of him, and he's just
Oh my
quite the character.
god, you need to find a Bill Lee book and read it.
Yeah, I mean, based on the hat that he's wearing and his mannerisms and the way he kind of exposes like pitching, like I guess it's kind of like behind behind the music or whatever, kind of showing you, or behind the mat, beyond the mat or whatever. But yeah, it's just the way that he kind of describes his pitches. Like, I can throw it this way and I can throw it this way, but if you make me throw it this way, I can't throw it this way, so I'm just gonna I can't throw it. So he shows you like all the complicated aspects of pitching and fastballs and different fastball seams and stuff. But I thought that was really entertaining. And then I guess his Russian hat. I don't know what that was all about. But he's quite the character.
I mean, his story about the last time he hit, his talk about free agency. I mean, he is just a treasure trove of information. There are two people from this documentary that I would love to see their unedited footage. I just want everything. The two people are Marvin Miller and Billy. I want to know everything they said.
That I wonder if that's like a DVD extra thing, right? You have the DVDs.
It's not a DVD extra. No, I want the whole thing. I want every.
Wow, so you want like the vault kind of stuff where it's just like raw, unedited.
If you gave me two people, Billy and Marvin Miller would be the two.
Gotcha. And then we'll add Bret Hart to that list as well, just as like a.
Oh my God!
all the takes in between the takes about Vince McMahon. So yeah, for sure.
Bret Hart in the WCW documentary is probably one of my favorite memes of the year.
We're gonna go a little off track, but yeah, these wrestler baseball comparisons, they really come hand in hand, because sometimes they're just kind of obvious. But yeah, I mean, where do you want to go next on this one? Because there's a lot going on in the '60s. I mean, you want to talk about Clemente and how that story was that? No, that was '71. My bad.
Oh, that was '72. I mean, Kurt Flood. We got Marvin Miller becoming the executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Association and basically reforming it to become a full-fledged union with negotiating powers. And this would bring to end the reserve clause eventually. And I mean, other than Jackie Robinson and Babe Ruth, to me, and I think Stutz Terkel's the one that says it, like, Marvin Miller is the third most important person in the history of baseball, I believe, because I think every free agent in every sport owes a portion of their salary to Marvin Miller's legacy, because I think he is that important. And I think he is a great union man, and just believing in the players as laborers, not as pieces of meat, not as just ball players, but believing in them as unionized, as laborers. I think that's so important. And I mean, look, in my opinion, that's something we should probably go back to. Look, I am of the belief that the best day to start a union was yesterday, and the second best day is today. Of course, that is my personal opinion. But look at how powerful that baseball union was when Marvin Miller was humming along. That's all I'm going to say.
And the third best day is WrestleMania Day, right? That's the joke I've heard in wrestling. The best time to start the union is WrestleMania Day. Would probably tell you. That's probably what I heard it from.
I also love that Kurt Flood would rather retire and try to get rid of the reserve clause instead of going to the Phillies. I think that tells us a lot too.
You know, I don't think it's a knock at the Phillies, really. It's just more of like a stance.
No, it's more a knock at how racist they are.
Oh, that too, but just this idea of taking a stance, I really respect that. You know what I'm saying? Like, he sacrificed everything. Even though he got denied, he just...
I think so many of these football players, basketball, I mean, I think every sport, I think they talk about sacrifice. I don't think they know what sacrifice is. I think Kurt Flood, not physically, but just emotionally, spiritually, mentally, like, what he did was a real sacrifice.
And then Marvin Miller, taking his legacy and then going into that conspiracy we'll talk about in the ninth inning. But yeah, he pretty much exposed a lot of shit, Marvin Miller. And like I said, the way he speaks in a straightforward tone, you can tell that he's seen some shit and he's just like fed up. And that's kind of the vibe I get, that he's fed up with all these owners and all their bullshit and all their lying. And that's why he kind of felt like he was kind of the sheriff coming into town, so to speak. But yeah, that was a really interesting interview with Marvin Miller, and the fact that that Lance Hendrickson look is pretty awesome.
Brian, you need to buy Marvin Miller's book, and you need to read it, because I think it will lend so much more insight. I mean, I think they do a good job in the documentary, but just like, he really gets into some details, and I think it is again, I'm not expecting the documentary to get into these details, but I think it's well worth your time to check out his book.
Possibly. I'll check it out if it's on Amazon, the audiobooks or something like that. You never know. But I am fascinated with the character very much so, because he is probably the third most important person in the history of baseball.
So the ninth inning, I think it's kind of weak. I think it's kind of a weak ending because they basically do 24 years and they don't cover as much as they should. They focus on Brooks Robinson, who probably had one of the greatest World Series of all time. They touch on Roberto Clemente. They really get into the labor and the free agency with Kurt Flood, finally getting a free agency just a few years later with Andy Messersmith playing a big role in that. The New York Yankees becoming an early team to embrace free agency as they signed Captain Hunter as well as Reggie Jackson. Let's just focus on the 1970s first, and then we'll get into the 1980s. But the 70s, you also have the Oakland A's and Charles Finley. The Oakland A's having a terrible owner, shocker of all shockers. You have Hank Aaron breaking Babe Ruth's all-time home run record. And then you have what may be the greatest game in the history of baseball, the 1975 World Series, Game 6 between the Big Red Machine of the Cincinnati Reds and the Boston Red Sox. And Brian, this is our time. I can't believe our timing. This past week, we lost Louis Tiant, who was a pitcher on the Red Sox in 1975, and he faced Pete Rose in this very World Series. And there were a number of images popping up on my Twitter feed of these two facing off from that very World Series. Our timing, Brian, Pete Rose and Louis Tiant.
I know. I'm kind of worried about by the time this whole thing is out, like by the end of our ninth inning, what's going to happen with some of these players and actors too. But
a lot of them, Buck O'Neil and Marvin Miller are dead, so we can't kill them.
I know. Knock on wood, right? Zombies. But yeah, just that game is so historic. I can't imagine, like, if I was alive watching that. I think I don't know. I think I would have been a diehard Red Sox fan, but then the next day I just would have been so brokenhearted. But that's the story of this game. Is like they did everything to stay alive, and then they just blew it all away in Game 7. And they were up in Game 7. They were up 3-0 up to like the 5th inning or something in Game 7, the Red Sox, and they still blew it. And it's just like, that feeling. But it really lends to this like 2004 Red Sox win. It just makes that win even more special, I guess. And that's just kind of the way the history goes. Even 86, and they talk about the curse as well. But that game is just so incredible, man, because the way that Carlton Fisk has that, he's like pointing to the fucking foul pole, hit the foul pole, right to the foul pole. And then it hits the foul pole, and it's just this amazing moment. And I swear, like, every time you see footage of Red Sox Stadium or Fenway Park, it's like, it feels like there's 50,000 people there, right? But there's only like 35. Every fucking time it's maxed out, it's around 35,000, which still blows my mind to this day. I think they expanded it to 40,000, but still, like, that park and that historic moment, and then
Still one of the small baseball.
yeah, and then seeing that footage again in 2004 was just like, it made you root for the Red Sox even more in 2004, showing that footage. So truly an historical game, and apparently the ratings the next season went up because of this game. So it was one of those things that got the attention of a national audience. Supposedly it was the biggest World Series viewing up until that point. So yeah, just a lot of craziness in that game, and just a lot of history. Yeah, it's just unfortunate. Again, the Red Sox losing and seeing all those historical people talk about the curse and stuff. But little did they know that 20 years later they were about to get their redemption. So I thought, looking back on all this Red Sox history, it's always heartbreaking. But thinking about what's come of that, and the fact that they won 3 World Series since 2004, since 2004, they won 2004, 2007, I think 2013. But yeah, just tremendous.
Won 4 World Championships, sir. You are forgetting about 2018.
Oh, 2018. How can I forget? Of course, they beat the Dodgers.
I know you hold that one, but
oh god, I remember that night, Game 4. Anyway, but yeah, it's just a crazy game. Let's talk about Roberto Clemente, because this guy, I mean, I don't know, they didn't focus enough time on him.
Probably deserved more.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, man, because the plane crash, the fact that he died in the plane crash doing humanitarian work.
He literally got his 3,000th hit. He got his 3,000th hit, and then he died in the offseason. It's weird. It's beyond weird.
It's tragedy. That's what tragedy is, in terms of like some of these, people try to do the right thing, the heroic thing, and then it just kind of like becomes this tragedy. But I don't know if they mentioned that they created the Roberto Clemente Award like right after that, right? They don't think they mentioned that, and how much
I don't
of
know
like
when they created it, but it's definitely. Um, I mean, he is to Latino players what Jackie Robinson is to black players, and I don't think that is an exaggeration. He is a really important figure. I mean, they tried to call him Robert, and he insisted on being called Roberto, and I mean, I think that's really powerful, and it's unfortunate we didn't get even more. And I mean, if he was with the Yankees or Red Sox, we'd probably get a lot more on him. But he's with the Pittsburgh
and then Jackie
Pirates.
Robinson died like right around the same time too, and then he died like 10 days after he did that speech at the World
I mean,
Series.
he looked horrible. I mean, I can't believe he's 53 when he dies. He looks like he's 75, and his wife, over 100 years old, still with us. That I'm hoping I'm not cursing this, but I mean, I'm glad that Rachel Robinson has lived such a long life. It's unfortunate her husband didn't, but I'm glad that she has gotten to see the impact that he has had and to see him honored so many times.
Yeah, that was a sad moment, man, because I didn't realize how bad he looked when he died, and that's just the stress. That was just all stress, and you can tell like white hair, that much white hair in the 50 in your 50s. It's like, yeah, he went through a lot, and it sucks,
Would
but at least he's at peace.
again, Ken Burns did a Jackie Robinson documentary in its own right, 2 parts, 4 hours total. Strong recommendation to follow up.
Definitely for sure. What else that you want to cover here? I mean, they kind of skim over some stuff as well, but
They do.
I
They
guess.
came over stuff in the 80s, but I mean, they talk about George Steinbrenner. I don't think he's particularly interesting at this point. I think everything that's been said about him has been said. Same with Billy Martin, again, somebody else that, I mean, what else can be said
Well, I
about
think
him?
what the implication is they accused them about buying those 2 World Series in the 70s. Like they mentioned buying a team and putting it together based on the free agency rule.
I mean, the problem is like they talk about him as if he ruined the Yankees franchise, and then immediately after this documentary, the Yankees go
That
on
was the
one of
funny part.
time runs. Like they win 4 championships, and it doesn't like all that kind of goes away. So again, I don't really want to hear about anything about that. You get the 1979 Pirates. They talk about Willie Stargell and that whole era. I love those pirate uniforms. They're pretty great.
Yeah, and speaking of also uniforms, like I didn't know that the Oakland A's like picked their ugly colors on purpose just to stand out. And then they ended up on like a 3-4 year run of being incredible. So I don't know. Just those uniforms are so bad, but they just made them so stand out. And then the Pittsburgh Pirates uniforms, I mean, they've always been yellow and black. That were their motif, but I don't know. They just look like prison uniforms
I
almost.
really respect Pittsburgh for. They're like, we are black and gold. All of our teams are black and gold, and that's just the way it is. I appreciate that.
I mean, I appreciate it as well, but the stripes kind of make it look like a prison uniform a little bit, just a little bit, like a cartoonish kind of look. But you want to point out too that this is this the first time that a team was down 3-1 and came back and win the World Series?
Yes, I believe they mentioned that. Yes, this is
Okay,
one of
and
the
then the
first.
second time was the Cubs, right? And that's the only 2 times it's happened.
I don't know if it was the second time, but that I mean that was a big deal as well when the Cubs came back from 3-1 and probably sent us on the path that we are currently on today, where Doc Brown needs to break out the chalkboard and talk about how the world has gone to hell since then. But
Oh, that's where you're going with that one, huh? Okay, because I have a similar theory too about that, about how maybe the Cleveland Cavaliers shouldn't have won that title that year and changed everything in terms of the world. uh,
so the bottom of the ninth is heavily focused on the 80s. So you talk about free agency with Pete Rose leaving, Carlton Fisk leaving the Red Sox for the White Sox, and just all these big moves that are being made. But then, of course, that the kind of that one of the, I mean, they do talk about Kirk Gibson, they talk about Pete Rose, but it very much feels like that 86 World Series conversation is in so many ways the emotional climax of this entire documentary series because they've talked about basically all of the big Red Sox moments. And of course, you kind of have to talk about Bill Buckner. That's just kind of what you have to do. And again, I don't want to dwell on Bill Buckner because, again, the Red Sox have won 4 World Championships since then. Bill Buckner is no longer with us. We don't need to criticize him. but it is just this tragic tale, and I think Burns and his crew they do a great job of just showcasing it, and Vince Scully on the call does a magnificent job of just portraying everything that's going on.
I think that was a radio call, I think, right? I think he was on the radio
No,
broadcast.
he was on it. He was on NBC TV.
Okay. I know there was like some things where they wanted Vince Scully on the World Series no matter what, and they put him on the radio sometimes. But yeah, the thing is though, yeah, the
Because he
thing
did
about
the
this though,
86 and he
go
did
ahead.
88 as well because he did the Kurt
Okay.
Gibson call.
Yeah, for sure. But this thing about like Buckner like causing the game, like if you really look at it, they gave up the tying run already, right? That to me, like once you give the tying run, all bets are off. Any error on the field, like you can't really hold it against the guy because you had the lead and your pitcher couldn't get it done. Kind of, you see what I'm saying? Like I don't really blame him. Like
I
shit
mean, the Red
happens on the
Sox,
field.
literally, the Red Sox reliever, I think it's Bob Stanley. He literally basically blamed Buckner after the game for costing them the game. Like he threw his own teammate under the bus in the post game.
Okay, let's say Buckner makes the out, right? They go to extra innings. That doesn't guarantee that we're going to even win the game. Like they gave up the tying run. Like to me, it's always been like an over. I know I don't want to say overblown because it broke a lot of people's hearts, but to me, like looking at it like statistically wise, look at the stats and what was going on with the game and the actual what's going on. Like I can't blame the guy because your pitcher gave up the run. So it's like no matter what happens after what's his time.
And he was also DHing most of the time. He wasn't playing first as much.
I get that, but still, the game would have just been tied. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I'm not gonna lie. So in 04, I thought David Ortiz was going to do something similar because he was playing first and he was a DH, and then he made like one of the all-time great defensive plays in the history of the World Series at first. Do you remember this?
Vaguely. Was that game 1 or 2?
Oh, he was in the field, remember? And because they needed him at first, and he caught a ball, and then he got somebody out at third. Like he threw the ball and got somebody out at third. I think it was game 3.
Okay, because because he was only going to be playing first if this was the National League Park they were in, right?
Right.
So that was in St. Louis. Okay.
Yeah. In St. Louis, which that moment would never happen now because the DH is in both leagues. But it's pretty incredible to think about. Like, what a great transference of moments. Like to have the contrast of Bill Buckner and what happened with him, and then David Ortiz kind of exercising those demons. But I mean, it's pretty incredible. They talk about collusion, which I kind of wish they'd talk about that more. Like that's a huge deal.
That's a dark theory that I never knew about in baseball, dude. Like the fact that like the owners would refuse to sign agents.
That is literally a conspiracy. And when Marvin Miller compares it to 1919, I don't think that's an exaggeration, and I think that kind of undersells it. Actually,
I think it's worse.
Like, there was a huge settlement. Like the players got a huge settlement from that.
$280 million, dude. $280 million.
Yeah, I mean, again, I am very surprised that it hasn't been exposed, that this hasn't happened since.
And Howard, I really didn't know about it. Just kind of screams like, you know, that they kind of not covered up, but they kind of buried under the rug a little bit. And it kind of leads into the 94 strike. So whether that was the intention or not, it did kind of lead to the strike.
And that's what the 10th inning is kind of all about. But I mean, really, the thing they focus on is Pete Rose being banned from the game. And I mean, it's one of those things where
they simplified it too much, I think. Like
they did. I mean, but again, if Bart Giamatti doesn't die 10 days after the Pete Rose thing, I don't know that this is still a thing. It just feels like people are blaming Pete Rose for not only the gambling thing, but also killing Bart Giamatti, who everybody liked. And I think that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, that makes no sense to me, but I get the correlation to it all. But like I mentioned before, I think looking back now...
You realize Paul Giamatti is his son, right? You do realize that?
Who?
Paul Giamatti is Bart Giamatti's son?
Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I figured, Giamatti is like a... Well, I mean, Giamatti is like a cool name and all, but I don't want to assume that all Giamattis are related. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Giamatti is Bart Giamatti's son.
Okay, wow. I'm going to look into that later. I'm going to look into that later. But can we talk about how they didn't mention Fernando Valenzuela even once? Like,
I think that's a definite weakness.
Oh my God! Like I was
You
expecting a
talk
full
about-
section because I
Yeah,
watched the 30 for 30 like I don't know how many years ago, and that was like emotional for me. And
I
I was
mean,
expecting all this good
probably
stuff, and
that's
we didn't get it.
why, probably that's why we got a 30 for 30 is because the Ken Burns documentary didn't really cover it.
That's what I'm thinking too now, because like there's no mention of his name, no impact, no mention of the '81 World Series, and the fact that he struck out like all those dudes in that All-Star game, like, just frustrating. But I don't know. Maybe it's just such a local LA thing that it didn't really impact the whole MLB, but
I
I felt like it did. Like it
I
really did.
imagine and Latino fans really they do again the 10th inning I think does a better job. I don't think they mentioned Valenzuela, but they definitely get into the Latino impact on baseball much more in the 10th inning than they do here.
Yeah, I recommend the 30 for 30 because they really show you like how the Hispanic community grew into Dodger Mania with Fernando and how it transitioned to this different part of the franchise that we kind of have that now in Dodger Stadium. It's like tons of Hispanics, man, and it just kind of like all goes back and they all talk about Fernando Venezuela. So just so like mind-boggling to me that
Yeah,
I don't know if it's on the editing
I think
floor or
now.
I don't know.
Yeah, the ninth inning is probably my least favorite, just because I think they're trying to do too much. I really like the part about the 1975 World Series, but I kind of wanted more on the Reds of that era too. Like again, they focused on it in '75, but that team was just amazing.
And they
Like
also
Pete Rose
glossed over
aside,
how Pete Rose left for like how many years to Philly?
Pete Rose. I mean, he was one of the first big free agent
Yeah,
signings,
and then he went back. So, you know,
I mean, he was in Montreal for a year.
too, like I don't know, man. Like Pete Rose has quite the career that they kind of I don't know,
Yeah,
man. They kinda
talk
jumbled
about
it
it.
together really
Couple,
quickly and just kind of skipped over a lot, but he
uh,
was in 3 chapters, so I don't know.
there's a four-part documentary about Pete Rose on HBO Max, which I would recommend. Just know that I mean, there's a lot of Pete Rose spin in there, but I think you're definitely going to get some interesting perspective. I mean, he is a carny as they come. There's a reason that he did really well in wrestling because he himself is kind of a carny Donald Trump like figure. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I
And he
mean,
was
again,
actually smartly because the consistency of like always showing up for Kane matches at WrestleMania made it a thing that you were expecting for like I don't know how many years in a row, but he did it, and it was
in a
like
row,
entertaining
he
each
did
and every
it.
time. Yeah. Oh, God bless Pete Rose for that. Because when he came out dressed as that chick, was he in a chicken outfit or something, or the Phillies outfit?
15 and 15. Yeah, he was the chicken. Yep.
Oh my God, that was great. Ah, I'm having great memories of Kane. See, Kane can have good memories. It's just not like his matches or whatever, but he does have good like moments. So I know Kane gets
Just
a lot
don't
of criticism nowadays, but
for God's sake. Again, don't talk politics with him. For the love of God, don't do it.
yeah, I never voted for Kane, but he's always the dude that beat up Pete Rose at WrestleMania.
This is legacy. Brian, I think the ninth inning is kind of a weak ending, but overall, I think this is it's pretty spectacular. I know you really loved it. This was certainly worth the journey, right?
Oh, absolutely. Considering that I've only seen clips of this before, and then I started recognizing the clips and then putting it together as like a whole. I do have some criticisms. Like obviously, the ninth inning is just like too much for the time it was given. I would have really cut down the earlier parts, maybe. Um, I mean, it was cool that he went this in an extensive background of the history of baseball from like the 1800s and stuff, but you could have trimmed that down a little
I
bit.
To me, I would have had the '70s, '80s be their own thing and just stop. I'd stop at the earthquake and make that the ending instead of basically the Blue Jays.
Yeah, I get that too because like that earthquake was just crazy when it happened. I was 1 years old and I didn't even know about it until a few years later when the Northridge earthquake happened. So, yeah, just again, earthquakes in California. That's like that whole history there. So, a lot of history in that World Series, considering it was all California too. So, Oakland, San Francisco,
I mean, it was okay.
crazy
It was
time.
battle.
Yeah, and then with the earthquake coming in, it was just like, oh, that's such a California thing to have this giant earthquake in between this like California team series. So that kind of played into as well, in my opinion. But just the myth, because like not a lot of people will experience an earthquake in their lifetime. I know that sounds crazy, but for Californians, it's like 3 or 4 times a year. Like, you know what I'm saying?
You're waiting. one is what you're doing. You're waiting for the one that separates you guys from the rest of the country.
Oh, we're talking about Escape from LA now, aren't we? That's a whole other, oh boy, whole other can of worms there. But yeah, there's been rumors of the big one, so people thought that was the big one, so all things considering, and that was like a 7 point something maybe. Yeah, crazy times. And if you're ever in an earthquake, people, just be safe, because it's one of the most craziest things you can experience.
Alrighty, so Brian, I mean, I think this documentary is great. I would absolutely agree. There's some serious problems, but I think the 10th inning, I think, fills in some of the holes. I would say a lot of the 30 for 30s. There's a 4-part series on ESPN about the Mets. There's a Fernando Valenzuela documentary. There's the 4-part Pete Rose series. There's a Willie Mays documentary. There's a great Hank Aaron book out there by Howard Bryant. There's a great Ricky Henderson book by the same author, Howard Bryant. So definitely go read some books. Marvin Miller also has, as I mentioned earlier, a really great book that I think fills in a lot of the holes. But Brian, we just talked about the 9th inning of Ken Burns' baseball. But Brian, we are approaching the 9th inning of our journey with baseball movies.
So if you look at the calendar, folks, we got 2 more slots on the calendar for this month of October. So we're gonna go on the final journey of the 9th inning, or the 8th and 9th inning of our baseball journey. Next week is gonna be the 8th inning with Angels in the Outfield. That's the other movie from 1994. We're gonna talk about. We're gonna also talk about how we'd already talked about 1994 being the climax of like baseball movies in Hollywood kind of thing. We'll get back to that discussion as well, and kind of see how Disney kind of ties into all that stuff and the legacy of that movie. With the 2002 Angels, because that was kind of a thing too as well. And then we'll talk about the next week will be the 9th inning, our final movie on the journey, Moneyball, which really is very relevant now considering what's going on with the A's franchise. And it was just crazy to me when they were closing Ebbets Field and they show that footage, and you could see people bottling up dirt and people doing the exact same thing in 2024 for the Coliseum in Oakland was just like so like. Wow, you know what I mean? Like, what a time. It was like 55 we're doing it, 2024 we're doing the same thing. We're trying to maintain this park, and it's gone to shit, and now we have to close and move, and it's just so heartbreaking. But we're going to talk about that as well, and how that kind of all comes together with the 9th inning and Moneyball and the concept of Moneyball, and does it really work or not. And as of this recording, the Kansas City Royals just got eliminated to the big boys, so we'll see, because I guess Detroit's the last small Moneyball team left in the playoffs right now, so we'll talk about that too.
In a manner of speaking, yes, but I mean, we're gonna talk about the end of baseball basically next week.
Yeah, I mean, look,
and then
when I put this together, I had no intention of like making Moneyball like that relevant as the 9th inning final movie. It just kind of happened that way chronologically. And with this whole A's thing, I thought, oh, that's a perfect thing. And then seeing the footage now of like the last day of the A's Coliseum game, Jesus Christ, man! It was just like seeing that.
And there is going to be a 30 for 30 about Oakland, I guess, and part of that's going to be because I guess they were shooting footage. But as I was going to say, in 2 weeks, Ben Phillips and I are going to lighten the mood up. We're going to be talking about our top 20 Disney movies of all time. Brian, I know we've already got it in the can. I know you're going to be excited to see what was our number 1.
Yeah, it's going to be very controversial, probably. I don't know. We'll see. Personal taste, but for me personally, I guess I got to go with Lion King. But we'll see what the overall top 20 says.
When you listen to the podcast, I mean, you'll hear it before anyone else. So I'll look forward to your thoughts. But for Brian, I'm Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you all again next week for our 9th inning.